Welcome to a Tech Moment on Cannabis Tech. I'm your host, Christina Etter. In this podcast, we take just a few minutes to talk about some of the exciting science and technology that's shaping and transforming the cannabis and hemp industries. Now look, growing a few cannabis plants comes with its own set of challenges, but growing several thousand cannabis plants becomes exponentially more difficult. Maintaining a consistent environment in 400 square feet is much different than maintaining a consistent environment across 40,000 square feet. Although legal cannabis is a relatively new industry, indoor agriculture has been evolving for several decades. As the industry grows and gains acceptance, the bigger these operations have to be just to sustain the demand. One of the fringe benefits of this rapid growth is that the industry is starting to gain attention of some more traditional, experienced companies and equipment providers who have solutions for these growing pains. As one of the most trusted names in HVAC solutions, Trane has been in existence for over 100 years, creating a wide range of commercial HVAC solutions, including those for indoor agriculture operations like cannabis. A national account executive, Justin Barnes has been with Trane Technologies for almost 24 years, working in a variety of commercial operations. Today, Justin leverages his experience from a variety of vertical markets to provide indoor growers with strategic cooling and energy efficiency and cost savings. Justin works with engineers to design indoor growing facilities that meet requirements and specifications for cooling and dehumidification to achieve those optimal environment conditions and keep energy efficiency as the main focus. Also with Trane for 19 years, Enterprise Account Executive Marshall Kaufman is also a wealth of experience in indoor agriculture. Working with indoor growers, he provides recommendations for indoor environmental quality, or IEQ, preventative and predictive maintenance, automated controls, data analytics, and HVAC systems. Kaufman supports growers throughout all stages of the design system, including installation, use, and expansion, which results in increased productivity, energy efficiency, and system reliability. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. I am so glad to have you on the podcast today.
Our pleasure. Thank you for a nice introduction. It's nice to hear a career summarized in just a few sentences.
It is fun to hear those bios once in a while, right? So let's talk about Trane because, from my perspective, I've been in agriculture most of my life, grew up on a farm in Iowa. I worked for DuPont Pioneer for several years. So in terms of HVAC systems, Trane is pretty much a household name. So do you want to give us just a little bit of background on Trane and kind of what Trane actually does? What's the breadth of what you guys do?
Yeah, so Marshall, I can take that one. So people know Trane mostly from a residential perspective because that's mostly where we're in the house footprint. But Trane is a world-class manufacturer of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning equipment with a global footprint of distribution. And we serve the markets for the residential, commercial, and industrial markets. So we manufacture products such as chillers that make cold water to air handlers, to package unitary rooftop units and split systems, to variable refrigerant flow split systems, to variable air volume boxes, all coming together to heat and cool the space. We're also a controls manufacturer, so the equipment that we install, we will also be able to control it on site and or remotely. We're also a service provider with service technicians and rolling trucks that we can provide scheduled maintenance to the equipment that's installed. We can provide repairs because nothing lasts forever. And we can also do replacement of the equipment at the end of life. Another aspect of Trane brings to the table, we're an energy services company, so we can help look at your building holistically and provide energy saving measures from looking at your HVAC system to lighting and all other aspects that utilize energy and come back with payback analysis. We can also help you evaluate your energy bills and negotiate terms with utilities. So it's a very holistic, broad approach that Trane has taken. I'm most proud of a recent mission statement that we have put out there is we're looking to reduce the energy intensity of the world. And we do that by providing energy efficient equipment and controls that's also sustainable. So it just brings a lot to the table and we get to wear many hats. It's fun.
So I gotta ask, did you ever really imagine that Trane would be stepping foot into the cannabis industry?
Take that one, Marshall.
Yeah, Justin and I were talking about this the other day a little bit, and he residing in Colorado and me in Arizona. Both of our states were early adopters and entrance into legalized cannabis business. So it was very much a natural progression for the experts and the folks in our respective offices to continue engaging with their engineers whom they've been working with for potentially decades and decades. As those engineers got into the space, Trane actually moved into the space as well, and continue to provide those solutions for engineers and then ultimately the end user customer. So it was just a natural progression that we moved into quite easily. Just like I said, relying upon time-tested relationships with those engineers, and learning this new type of customer, which in many ways mimics the especially the sense of urgency, the critical nature of these environments mimics many customers that we've been working with for quite a while.
Yeah, and overall, we're a really conservative industry, so it was stepping outside of the boundaries and learning new technology that didn't really fit into any of the other vertical markets that we've dealt with. So it's really been a Wild West mentality and learning together with what's the right solution. And there's been mishaps along the way of misapplying product and the end result of what the customer is expecting. So I like to think that we've fine-tuned our capabilities as a whole industry over the past few years, but it's been a fun learning curve.
I'll bet. And I think one of the things that kind of fascinates me there is that Trane's been around for over 100 years, so it literally, the company itself has seen prohibition take place. They have seen prohibition end, and now we're coming back around again and watching this prohibition end with cannabis. And it's just very fascinating to me to see the evolution of these companies and kind of how perspectives change. And personally, I think it's fantastic to see some of these companies that do have decades or centuries of experience in things starting to move into the cannabis industry now. Because like I said, I think that there are solutions that are out there. It's just a matter of the right time, I think, for different companies to actually step into the industry. So the next question that I really want to move into is really about these problems in cannabis cultivation. Now, through my role in cannabis tech, I've talked to multiple different growers, multiple different equipment providers and producers, but I would like to hear from your perspective. What are some of the biggest problems that you've seen these cultivation facilities face?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Marshall and I work on a day one, day two concept. I work with specifying the equipment up front. Marshall works on day two after the equipment's installed. Some of the biggest problems that we encounter is not knowing what the end facility's goals are in terms of the KW usage of the light and the intensity, the number of plants that are going to be in the facility, and as a result, the water usage. And those items affect the temperature and humidity that we're trying to control for the temperature and the dehumidification, removing the water.
Yeah, and then I think picking up where Justin left off, then as we continue to stay with that customer and provide preventative and predictive maintenance, certainly ensuring that the customer gets the full expected lifespan out of that equipment and it remains reliable throughout that process is just as critical as appropriately applying and getting the design right.
So tell us the worst. What's some of the horror stories that you've seen, and just how bad can things get when operations don't take a lot of these things into consideration?
Well, we've had instances where we, again, had designed to assumed number of lights in the space and also number of plants. And we've seen some facilities double and squeeze in and repurpose a room. And what can happen is that the space conditions get outside, get into harmful areas, and we can get mold and fungus growth that is difficult to get rid of. And again, you can lose a huge crop, which is just a devastating effect. So that would be worst case scenario. We also run into situations where we've had rain on coming from equipment due to misapplication and misinstallation. So just water entering the building in ways that we weren't expecting. Marshall, any other ideas on?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that comes to mind is, growers in general are constantly, tweaking the secret sauce and tweaking, how they utilize a room and how they want to grow their plants. And it's fine if we're kept involved with that, because anytime that they change the application, number of plants, water in that space, the equipment needs to be adjusted or added to in turn. So getting the design right up front is important, but also as changes occur and they want to change, how they're utilizing that room, making sure that, Trane, is involved in that process so we can make adjustments with them is very important.
One thing that you had mentioned, Marshall, when we were talking the other day is that some even encountered some growers combining repurposing of the room from mothering and cloning and vegetation, and even putting up air curtains in order to divide it versus having wall barriers. And that just is something that may not have been designed up front, and that can potentially cause problems with the operation, but all learning.
Yeah. In that case, we're obviously managing multiple microclimates within that same space. So making sure that we're thinking about it before jumping into it, and we're taking that into account, super important to long-term success.
Most definitely, most definitely. And one of the things that I like to say, I know we always say that practice makes perfect, but in these instances, I like to say that planning makes perfect, because you really do need to kind of think ahead, think about your operation, think about what you're going to do, and then plan for these kinds of things. So it's obviously an investment when growers, start these facilities. And so it makes sense to think about these kinds of things in advance. So talk a little bit about the importance of this upfront design and considerations. What kinds of things are most critical that people need to make decisions on when they're looking at moving into a building? And then Justin, I want you to kind of touch base. You talked briefly in the intro there about being able to go in and help people figure out how to correct things. So I'm assuming then you can actually go in and kind of retrofit an existing operation to help them kind of get things under control as well. So let's start first with pre-planning and design for people that are just getting ready to start up a new facility. And then let's talk about what you can do on the back end for existing facilities as well.
Yeah, you bet. There's quite a bit of stuff to talk about there. So in the upfront design, it's important that we need to get air movements to the plants so that the evapotranspiration can take place and to prevent those microclimates. So we're trying to achieve about 0.5 to 1 meters per second air movement across the plants. And we're going to take into account, we're expecting about 40 to 50 air changes per hour in the room, which is quite a bit higher than a traditional commercial application. So some of the things that we like to know up front are the plants, what are the height of the plants that you're planning to grow? Because that can affect the volume, the cubic feet per minute that we're trying to apply to get that air movement. What is the plant's irrigation rate in terms of gallons per plant per day? That's the amount of dehumidification that we need to account for. What are the maximum plants that are going to be in a room, as well as what are going to be the minimum plants of the room, because we need to make sure that our equipment can ramp down for minimum part load. We designed a full load all the time, but part load is just as important as full load design. Um, what is the lighting wattage that we're going to have that we need to cool? Because that's what's adding heat to the space. And it depends on the type of lighting as well. You know, with LEDs, we have a lot less light intensity, but that also changes the light spectrum that the growers are applying to their plants. We need to understand the desired temperature and humidity, which is also translated into vapor pressure deficit, VPD. That's an important equation that helps growers be most successful in creating the best quality product, most consistent yield, and the largest yield, which brings bottom line value to why the grower is growing in the first place. We need to understand the room dimensions for length, width, and height to know the volume, because not only do we need to know the internal design loads, but the external shell. So where is it located geographically? What type of building is it? Because we have to confirm the envelope gains that are just above and beyond conditions that we have to temper the equipment and space to. So those are upfront important discussions that then we do plug and chug with our formulas and our programs to provide equipment that's going to, following cytometric charts and algorithms to provide the best equipment applicable. So Marshall, maybe you could comment on some existing retrofit, how we might approach a project.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, all those design considerations are equally as important in a retrofit application as well, taking into account all the things that Justin mentioned. What we're dealing with in a retrofit application, though, is potentially existing equipment, especially if we are retrofitting an existing grow space for whatever reason. How was that equipment designed? What was it designed for? And realistically, what's the reliability going forward of that equipment? So we're taking all that into account. We certainly don't want to have a situation where the equipment is oversized for the new intended purpose of that room. That's going to cut down on reliability and lifespan of that equipment. So in some of those cases, it's just easier and more prudent to replace the equipment. But certainly, if these customers are moving into, like, say, a former grocery store distribution center, and they're going to retrofit that, wall construction, some of those things that Justin mentioned, along with the existing equipment there is important to consider as well. So it's no less a challenge on the retrofit side than it is on the new side. In some ways, a challenge.
Yeah, yeah. Retrofit can even be more challenging because the electrical loads that the building has may not be able to go beyond the expectations for the grower because of what we've inherited. So yeah, existing facilities can even prove more of a logistical nightmare sometimes.
And we go back to your previous question, Christina, where you asked about some of the worst case scenarios that we've seen, and Justin just made me think of that. Working with one customer in the Phoenix area here, they moved into a space, and the electrical service was definitely a problem for them. It delayed their opening, it delayed their first crops until they got that upgraded, and it was a very unexpected, costly add to their startup costs.
Yeah, dealing with utilities isn't always the quickest thing. There can be significant delays depending on where you're living on their ability to meet that upgrade purpose.
Right. Yeah, and I was thinking about that while you were talking. I can imagine that coming in and retrofitting a building and making all these significant kind of infrastructure changes inside that building has got to be difficult. I'm not by any means have I ever been in construction, but I have been in IT, and I know just in IT, replacing a system or going in and changing things after they've been set up for several years or, maybe a decade or more, it's difficult to go in and make those changes. So I can only imagine the complexities that you run into retrofitting some of these older buildings. And like you said, it's hard to tell where are some of these cannabis facilities, what kind of buildings they're going into. It's really interesting to see how this continues to evolve and the different types of buildings and facilities and things that they are in. So now let's get into the actual Trane technology solution. Now, obviously we talked about how you guys are in Colorado, you're in Arizona, so you're familiar with the cannabis industry. But what did Trane actually, you kind of set out to design this system that's specific for the cannabis industry. So talk to us a little bit about what makes your solution, what makes a Trane solution specific to cannabis, and what makes it different from some of the other systems that are out there.
Sure. So from an equipment perspective, I think Trane brings to the table the most homogeneous representation of products. We can go as high end as a chiller, air handler, and pump solution. That might be for a much larger application to we can get down and dirty with doing furnace splits with dehumidifiers. But I think that to find the sweet spot where Trane has decided to market and enter the indoor agricultural opportunity is approaching it from a packaged unitary solution, which makes it convenient and flexible and scalable, most importantly, and easy to install for the grower. And so Trane has the ability with a packaged rooftop unit called Thrive. It's a play on words. We not only want the growers to have successful crops and cultivate, but we want them to thrive. So we call it our Thrive Horizon packaged rooftop unit. And it's designed for 100% return air to not only cool, but dehumidify, which is the key part that we're trying to achieve during the night cycle when we're gonna have high humidity, but not a strong sensible load that we typically see when the lights are on. So this purposed packaged rooftop unit really just makes it easy for the engineers to design around. The product offering is from 3 tons all the way up to 80 tons, and it has an airflow range from 500 CFM all the way up to 25,000 CFM. So that really offers the end user quite a bit of scalability and flexibility for how they are going to apply it. And then by having the equipment installed either on the roof or adjacent to the building with external ductwork, we're able to maximize the square footage of the space where the real opportunity is for the grower to make their money so that they can have the largest canopy solution and not interfere with serviceability within the space. So it's been fun to see our package solution really being applied and then marketing dollars put behind it for a new frontier for Trane.
Yeah, and I would just add to that as well that our approach again just centers around the communication we have with the design engineers and the ultimate end user of this equipment. Digging into a lot of those design considerations and really coming up with some very good customized solutions is very important to long-term success there. And it's one of the things Justin mentioned that kind of makes us unique to some extent is, and it's very cool to see, is that we have longtime Trane employees, sales engineers and design engineers on staff that have been with Trane for decades and decades. Watching them adapt and thrive in this new space, this new type of customer over the last decade or so has been very, very cool. So they're taking collectively hundreds, if not thousands of years of collective experience and applying it to this new space, working with their engineers and these customers. It's very cool to see.
Yeah, so an interesting thing about Trane for differentiator, perhaps, Trane hires engineers, and so we can apply the technical sale and really understand how we're applying the equipment. A lot of my peers have 30 and even 40-year, 10-year relationships at Trane. So that just speaks volumes of the culture that we have as a company and the opportunities that are present to us. This just presents another one for us that we're chasing. So it's fun.
Most definitely. And I'm really glad that you brought up the term scalability and talked about the ability for your system to scale from a smaller size system up to those larger size systems. Because, I think that really is one of the hottest topics in the cannabis industry today, is that everybody is trying to figure out how to expand their operations, how to do so efficiently, how to do so and save money in the process. So I think, working with a company as experienced as Trane is probably in these growers' best interest, because you're going to have those solutions and you're going to have the ability to, the experience and know-how of helping these industries or helping these different businesses grow. So I think that's absolutely phenomenal. Now, one of the things that we kind of talked about prior to today's recording was the term service agreements. Do you want to talk about what service agreements are and why they are so critical for some of these businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we've been talking a lot about the upfront design considerations, but as that equipment is installed and commissioned, and ultimately, its useful life begins, things change along the way. The purpose of the room, the amount of plants, that sort of thing, and so that system changes as well. So when Trane has a service agreement with these customers, not only are we able to support them, through the warranty period of the equipment, but through the lifespan of the equipment as well. And as things change in that system, we can help our growers, the operators, make system changes as well. One of the things that we like to incorporate into our service agreements is, lots of visits, lots of site operating inspections, because we find that when one of our technicians is there, they become a trusted partner to that grow facility, and the more they're there, the more opportunities that those growers have to grab one of our technicians and say, come over here, let's take a look at this. This is what we're seeing here. What do you think? So we have those relationships, for both, small to medium growers, all the way up to large enterprise growers as well. And really at the heart of everything is, preventative and predictive maintenance, which vastly increases the reliability of that equipment, and ensures that that initial upfront investment by the growers, that they realize the full lifespan, the intended lifespan of that equipment, and that there's no premature failures.
Marshall, could you comment a little bit maybe on how the controls and remote monitoring services might be something that could serve this market?
Sure. Yeah, so I was just talking about mechanical maintenance, but where Trane has Trane controls, and oftentimes competitors' controls as well, we can provide remote monitoring, so that if there is an unexpected failure, hiccup in the system, something along those lines, our remote operators can log into the system, potentially rectify the situation remotely before any trucks need to be rolled or any additional expenses are incurred like that, and gets the equipment back up and running a lot quicker. Where there is more of a issue that requires on-site maintenance, it also allows us to dispatch and get technicians and the appropriate people out there a lot quicker than if the operators just noticed conditions in the space changing. So that's the monitoring side of it. What Trane also provides are advanced data analytics based on how the system is operating. So those analytics can potentially pinpoint overuse of the equipment, underuse of the equipment, which can lead to premature failure. It can also identify ways in which we can optimize the system to realize greater energy efficiency, and just get rid of the waste involved, that we often find, especially as systems go into place, like changes are made. Those analytics can help us identify how to get things back on track.
It helps with the smoking gun. It gives us a view into the past and the present. It's very, very valuable information.
Absolutely. Data is king, I think, in no matter what industry you're in, data is absolutely king. You know, the other thing that I think is fascinating too is to kind of see the marriage of technology and agriculture. And, you know, like I said, I have background with DuPont Pioneer, and it was very interesting for me then to kind of see how different types of technology were being used in ag and how that is improving cultivation environments and improving efficiencies. Obviously, everybody today, or most everybody anyway, is or should be concerned about our environment and making sure that our carbon footprint is low and that we're using energy efficiently and that we're not having these wastes that you speak of. You know, it's definitely one of those things that I think this industry in particular really needs to pay attention. I heard a stat, it's been a couple of months ago now, that the cannabis industry ranks up there in terms of power usage and efficiency as like hospitals and data centers that are extremely busy or electric heavy. You know, so it's interesting for me to see how this evolution is taking place and see businesses start to be, you know, more interested in solutions like yours that are going to help them reduce their waste in energy.
I said the other year I attended a conference for cannabis, and one of the stats that they had mentioned, this was a few years ago, so I'm sure it's already changed, but 2% of the energy for Denver proper was being dedicated for the cannabis grow. That's a significant amount of infrastructure for a utility to repurpose that may not have intended for that use. So I can only imagine it's a higher point at this time. So it's important to try and reduce that energy consumption, as you mentioned.
Most definitely. So finally, do you want to just talk to our audience a little bit? Tell them how they can get in touch with Trane if they're interested in having their buildings looked at, or how you might be able to help them control their HVAC solution or their environment a little bit better. How can our audience get in touch with Trane?
Sure, but before I get to that, one last thing that came to my head that's a very important part that we didn't talk about from a design perspective is odor mitigation. You know, we're trying to live with our community, and during the flowering portion of the grow, there can be quite a bit of smell that permeates potentially outside of the facility. So working with Trane, we can help with odor mitigation, working with passive filters to oxidation solutions to UV lights as well. So that's just want to throw that little bit out there. But if growers or engineers want to get in touch with Trane, well, there's definitely capable of speaking with Marshall or myself. That is one, but you know, Trane is rooted in the contracting and engineering community. So there are existing relationships. Just have your mechanical engineer reach out to the local Trane office, and I'm sure they'll be able to tap in that way. Another way is if you go to trane.com, we have a drop-down menu for some of our vertical markets. One of them is indoor agriculture. And we have an input form that you can put your information, and our marketing team will pass it on to the appropriate people. But we're very much represented in the market and reaching out in several different ways. You'll be able to land someone that can help you.
Yeah, and that's all across the gamut of needs from these customers. You know, whether they're looking to design a new space, retrofit a space, or whether they're just having constant problems in the space they're in now, and reaching out to the local Trane office. We can get technicians out there. We can get some of our engineering experts out there to help address the issue as well. So be happy to help in any way we can.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you both for taking the time out of your day today to come on the show and talk about this stuff. I know that things like equipment and heating and cooling and all of that may not be the coolest or the sexiest conversation to have in cannabis. But, you know, it is very, very vital to the growers that are out there, and we so appreciate your expertise. Obviously, it's encouraging to see companies like Trane with all of this experience and expertise coming into the industry to help make things better. So we so appreciate your time, and we look forward to hearing more from Trane and how things are improving with your cannabis involvement.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity to be on your show.
Yep. Thank you, Christina.